My millionaire father made my husband CEO before he died. 2 years later he filed for divorce, claimed everything was his, and walked into court completely unaware of what my father had secretly left behind. My father's last gift to my husband seemed a testament of trust. But 2 years after his passing, that gift became a weapon in a brutal divorce battle, unleashing a secret my father had meticulously hidden. The precise moment I understood my marriage was irrevocably broken wasn't when the divorce papers landed on my doorstep. It wasn't driving past the imposing building my grandfather, Silas Vance, had literally helped construct, now crowned with a new sign, Thorn Group, its stark, modern lettering a cold repudiation of everything my family's name, Vance, had ever stood for. It wasn't even seeing my daughter, Willow, at our kitchen table, her jaw set, silently studying a newspaper photo of her father, Julian, seated at her late grandfather's desk, looking as if he'd always belonged there. No, the true end arrived with a phone call. Julian's voice was measured, almost tender, the kind of practiced calm that comes from repeating a script until every inflection feels authentic. He told me, with the air of someone bestowing a kindness, that I really didn't want this to escalate to a hearing. Then came that pregnant pause, the one where a man feels emboldened enough to reveal his true colors. This company, he began, his tone dripping with condescension, started with a mop and a bucket, with men doing grunt work. I made it sophisticated. You, Elara, were never truly suited for these kinds of rooms. Willow, seated opposite me, slammed her palms flat against the table. I simply looked at the phone. All right, Julian, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, before ending the call. Then, I walked over to the kitchen drawer, pulled out the crumpled note my father had left me, and dialed a number I hadn't touched in 2 years. On the second ring, Elias Croft answered, as if he'd been expecting my call. Let me tell you about my father, Arthur Vance, because nothing that follows makes sense without understanding him. Arthur, or Frank as everyone knew him, though he signed everything with his full name in the careful, deliberate cursive of a man who believed a signature was a promise, founded Vance Enterprises in 1973. He started with a single commercial cleaning contract and a second-hand floor buffer he'd bought from a retiring school janitor. My grandfather, Silas, worked that first contract himself, 7 nights a week, cleaning a downtown office building in Charlotte that reeked of stale cigarettes and old carpet. He'd bring my father along on weekends. It was there my father learned early on that the gap between having nothing and building something wasn't about talent or luck or knowing the right people. It was about showing up, every single time, without complaint. Silas died of a heart attack in 1989. My father took over a small company with 11 employees and 4 commercial contracts. Over the next 31 years, he transformed it into a facilities management firm boasting 412 employees, contracts spanning 7 states, and an annual revenue just over $41 million. He achieved this the same way his father had, methodically, patiently, always preferring people who worked quietly and effectively over those who spoke loudly and impressively. In the lobby, he kept a portrait of Silas, not a grand oil painting, but a simple 8 by 10 framed photograph. It showed Silas in his work uniform, holding that floor buffer, grinning like a man who just accomplished something truly meaningful. For 3 decades, my father walked past that photograph every morning and gently touched the frame, not with dramatic flair, just a quick 2-fingered tap. It was a private ritual, a conversation between the living and the dead. I grew up steeped in that company, much like some children grow up in churches. It shaped my entire understanding of the world. Every summer from age 14, I worked there, starting in the mailroom and rotating through 3 different departments by the time I graduated college. I knew the crew supervisors by name. I understood which accounts were challenging and why. I remembered how the Henderson contract in Greensboro nearly collapsed in 2003 over a billing dispute, and how my father personally drove there, sat down with the facility manager, and resolved it with a handshake and a formal, handwritten apology. At 26, I left the company to forge my own path in nonprofit management, a decision my father fully supported. He was, above all, a man who believed people had to build their own foundations. Your grandfather's company isn't truly yours, he told me, until you've earned something somewhere else first. Come back when you've got calluses. I returned at 32, armed with a director title and 10 years of experience in grant writing and organizational development. I also brought Julian Thorne, my husband. I should describe him as I saw him then, which is starkly different from how I understand him now. Fairness demands I don't condense a 28-year marriage into a simple villain origin story. When I met Julian, he was 35, sharp, witty, and genuinely impressive in any room. He was the kind of man who possessed the rare ability to distill complex ideas into simple terms and make anyone he spoke to feel like the most fascinating person in the building. He held an MBA from Wake Forest and 10 years of operational experience. He was adept with people and even better with numbers. He could walk into a room full of cynics and leave with 3 new converts. My father liked him, which, at the time, meant more to me than it probably should have. He's smart, my father remarked after their first dinner together. My father wasn't one for elaborate explanations, but he spoke with that specific tone of approval he reserved for things that truly impressed him, and I took note. Our early marriage was good, not flawless. Julian's ambition sometimes made him difficult to live with, and my independence sometimes made me equally challenging, but it was genuinely good. We had Willow, built a life. Julian joined Vance Enterprises. At 40 as VP of Operations and, true to form, proved himself by excelling at the most visible aspects of the job. Looking back, the first red flag was so minuscule I barely registered it. My father had a specific phrase for acknowledging someone's work without overstating it, that was solid. From him, it was high praise, though not the highest. He used it for Julian in 2017 after Julian restructured the West Coast logistics operation, saving the company roughly $800,000 in annual overhead. Julian, however, interpreted it as the highest possible commendation. I noticed the disconnect, like a slightly off-key note in a song, not alarming, just a little wrong. But I moved on, as I was prone to do. I was good at moving on, at assuming the best, at extending the benefit of the doubt to the man I had married, loved, and built a life with. I extended it for far longer than I ever should have. My father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in January 2020. Stage 3, just touching the edge of operable. His oncologist, Dr. Anya Sharma, with 22 years of practice at Atrium Health, the kind of doctor who delivers news, good or terrible, in the same steady tone, described it as a narrow window with real options. He underwent surgery, then 8 months of chemotherapy. He lost 40 pounds, his hair, and, temporarily, the steady hands that had touched Silas's portrait frame every morning for 3 decades. Yet, he didn't slow down. Or rather, he slowed his body but accelerated everything else. Those 8 months of treatment were spent doing something I only understood in retrospect, organizing. Not in a sentimental, getting affairs in order way, but in the specific, meticulous, operational way of a man who knew the most crucial decisions he'd ever make were happening right then, while his mind was still clear enough to make them correctly. In September 2020, my father summoned Julian and me to his study. The room smelled of old wood and the instant coffee he'd favored since 1981. 2 documents rested on his desk. Elias Croft, from Croft and Bailey, PA, my father's corporate attorney for 17 years, a lawyer who wore reading glasses he refused to upgrade, claiming the slight blur in his periphery helped him focus on what mattered, sat in a corner chair, his briefcase on his lap. My father explained the documents. The first formally transferred operational control of Vance Enterprises to Julian Thorne as CEO, along with a structured equity arrangement granting Julian a 30% ownership stake, effective immediately. The company would remain Vance Enterprises. The transfer was real, and it was binding. The second document was a spousal consent form, standard procedure because Julian and I were married. My signature was needed to confirm I had no personal claim that conflicted with the transfer. Julian signed his document. I signed mine. Julian nodded, pocketed his pen, shook my father's hand, then Elias's, and spoke of being honored and not taking the trust lightly. He was perfect in that moment, gracious, appropriate. He said all the right things, in the right order, with the perfect amount of gravitas. He left the study first. I lingered to hug my father. The last thing he said to me before I walked out was, "I love you, Elara. You've always known how to wait for the right moment." I thought it was just a father offering a kind word to his daughter. I didn't understand it then. My father passed away on March 4, 2021, at 7:20 in the morning, in the bedroom of the house he'd lived in for 44 years. I was there. Willow was there. Julian was not. He was on a conference call with his West Coast operations team, a call he'd scheduled for 7 a.m., which I only learned about later. I've often wondered if that scheduling was careless or intentional. I still don't know, and I've decided that not knowing is acceptable, because it changes nothing that followed. Julian outwardly displayed appropriate grief. He spoke at the funeral, offering kind words. He talked about my father's vision, his patience, and the privilege of learning from him. Afterward, several people commented on how beautiful the eulogy was. I thanked them. 14 days after my father's funeral, the sign above the entrance to the building on Moorhead Street, The very building Silas Vance had secured his first cleaning contract for in 1973, the one my father had bought outright in 1994 and poured 3 years of renovation into, the building with Silas's photograph in the lobby, was changed. Vance Enterprises came down. Thorn Group went up. I found out from Willow. She drove past it on a Wednesday morning and called me from the parking lot, the phone line heavy with that specific kind of silence that means a person can't find words adequate to describe what they're seeing. I called Julian. He answered from my father's office, patiently explaining that a rebrand was operationally necessary. He said Vance Enterprises was linked to an old model, and Thorn Group better reflected the direction he intended for the company. He reminded me my father had given him full operational authority, and this was an operational decision. What happened to my grandfather's portrait? I asked. A brief pause. It's in storage, Elara. We can discuss displaying it somewhere appropriate. Somewhere appropriate. Silas Vance, who had worked that floor buffer 7 nights a week so his son could have a life, was now in storage. I hung up the phone and sat at my kitchen table. Willow was across from me, looking just as she had as a small child when she witnessed something she couldn't comprehend, not crying, but very, very still, filing something away permanently. I told myself Julian would come around. That grief did strange things to people. That the rebrand was tone-deaf, but not malicious. That 28 years of marriage had to account for something. I was wrong about almost all of it. The Charlotte Business Journal feature ran 6 weeks later. A full spread. Julian in a flawless charcoal suit, the kind of suit that communicates precisely who a person wants you to believe they are, sitting at my father's desk in my father's corner office. The office still contained the same wooden file cabinet my father had owned since 1987. The photographer, I noted, had carefully positioned Julian to keep the file cabinet out of frame. The journalist, Sarah Jenkins, with 8 years at the Journal, was a solid business reporter, not easily manipulated. But Julian was excellent in rooms. And he was excellent in that interview. He spoke of vision. He spoke of legacy. He spoke of the privilege of being entrusted with something important by a great mentor. He did not utter my father's name once in the entire 1,200-word article. Not Arthur Vance, not Frank, not even the founder. Just a great mentor, the previous leadership, and the foundation laid before my tenure. Willow read it at our kitchen table, both hands flat on the surface, jaw clenched. She looked up at me. He's rewriting it, she said. He's rewriting how it happened. I folded the newspaper, placed it in the drawer, and said nothing. Because deep in my mind, in the part my father had unknowingly trained, I understood that reacting was precisely what Julian expected. A public argument, an emotional confrontation, a wife and daughter making a scene about a business profile, that was a narrative Julian could control. That was terrain he had prepared for. So, I remained silent. And Julian mistook my silence for surrender. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday morning in November 2022. A plain envelope. My name, Elara Vance Thorn, listed near the top as respondent. 14 pages. 28 years of marriage, and I was a respondent. I sat with them at the kitchen table for a long time, not crying. I want to be clear about that, because people often expect a woman in this situation to cry. And there's nothing wrong with crying. But what I felt wasn't grief or shock. It was something colder, more clarifying. The sensation of something long anticipated finally arriving, and the strange relief of no longer having to anticipate it. The accompanying letter was from Julian's attorney, Marcus Sterling of Sterling & Associates, a firm known in Charlotte legal circles for high-asset divorce proceedings. This confirmed Julian had been planning this for quite some time. The letter outlined Julian's position, Vance Enterprises, referred to throughout as Thorn Group, never using my family's name, was his by virtue of the signed transfer documents. It stated my spousal consent had been fully executed, and my claim to any portion of the company's assets was legally foreclosed. He was offering me the house. The house, and a settlement. I won't specify the exact figure here, but it was the kind of number that appears generous until you realize it represented approximately 4% of the company's actual worth. The house my grandfather, Silas, had never visited because he'd passed away before my parents bought it. The house that held no portrait of Silas on its walls. He was offering me the house and calling it fair. I put the letter back in its envelope and called Willow. She was at my door within 40 minutes. We sat together, and I told her everything. She remained quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she simply said, "Mom, fight this." "I know," I replied. Do you have anyone? A lawyer? I paused, considering. I need to make a call first, I said. I went to the kitchen drawer, the same one where I'd placed the folded newspaper. At the very back, tucked behind an old takeout menu and a grocery receipt, amidst the accumulated small debris of a functioning life, was a handwritten note. My father's unmistakable script, the careful, deliberate cursive of a man who believed a signature was a promise. Your father was a thorough man. And below it, a phone number. Elias Croft's personal line. My father had slipped it into my coat pocket the day of his diagnosis as I was leaving the house. In the chaotic weeks that followed, I transferred it, unread, into the kitchen drawer, where it had remained for 2 years. I dialed. Elias answered on the second ring, as if he'd been waiting. Elias Croft's office was on the 14th floor of a downtown building, just 4 blocks from the Moorhead Street building where Julian had changed the sign. He was 63, compact, silver-haired, possessing that particular stillness I associate with people who have spent their careers reading documents others wish had never seen the light of day. He shook my hand, poured coffee without asking, and placed a brown envelope on the desk between us. Your father came to see me, he said. 2 weeks after the signing. He paused. Alone. Elias folded his hands. He had me draft a separate document. He asked that it be kept entirely confidential, not filed in any manner that would surface in a standard title search or corporate records review. It required some creativity on my part, but it was entirely legal. Your father was very clear about that. He wanted it done right. He slid the document across to me. I read it once, then again, then a third time, because the third time was when my hands stopped trembling enough for the words to truly settle. A spousal equity trust. 49% beneficial interest in Vance Enterprises. The document used my family's name throughout, not Julian's rebrand. Held in trust for Elara Vance Thorne. One trigger condition, divorce proceedings initiated by Julian Thorne. One window, 180 days from the date of filing. I looked up at Elias. When were the papers filed? He told me the date. I counted backward, then forward. 7 days. I had come with 7 days remaining in the window. Your father said, Elias continued, pausing in the careful way of a man about to deliver something precise, that if you didn't come, to let it expire. He said it was your life and your choice. He said he would not make the decision for you. My father had built the door, framed it, hung it, and left the knob on my side. He had trusted me to decide whether to open it. I looked at Elias Croft, this man who had guarded this secret for 2 years with the patient professionalism of someone who understood that some documents aren't just paperwork, but time capsules, promises from the dead to the living. I picked up the pen. Tell me what I need to sign, I said. The following morning, I hired my own attorney, Eleanor Hayes of Hayes and Partners. 31 years in family and corporate law, a former clerk for the Fourth Circuit, the kind of lawyer who wears no jewelry beyond plain stud earrings and communicates exclusively in declarative sentences. She reviewed the trust documents for 4 hours. She called me at 9:47 p.m. This is airtight, she said. Are you sure? I asked. Your father's attorney crafted this very carefully. The trust predates Julian's rebrand, meaning it references the original entity under its original name. And there's an explicit provision that any successor entity holding substantially the same assets is subject to the same beneficial interest. Julian renamed the company, he didn't restructure it. The assets are identical. A brief pause. Julian's attorney is good, but he was looking for the wrong thing. He thought the signed transfer documents were the whole picture. Eleanor confirmed that they were the whole picture Julian saw. Your father made sure there was a picture Julian never saw. I sat in my kitchen, in the quiet of a house that felt different now. Not smaller, but more precisely sized, the right dimensions for the life I was about to build. And I thought about my father at Elias's desk, 2 weeks after that signing, still in the throes of chemotherapy, his hands still unsteady, drafting a document he would never see used, for a contingency he hoped would never occur, for a daughter he trusted completely, without ever telling her he did. I love you, Elara. You've always known how to wait for the right moment, I hadn't known what I was waiting for. He had. The hearing was on a Tuesday. I wore a navy dress and my grandmother's earrings. Willow drove me and waited in the hallway outside the courtroom. As I walked past her, she gripped my hand for 2 seconds without speaking, which was exactly right. Julian was already seated when I entered. Marcus Sterling was beside him, tall, silver-templed, with the practiced posture of a man who bills $400 an hour and knows how to look worth it. Julian himself was in a dark suit, sitting just as he had in that newspaper photograph, comfortably, with the absolute certainty of a man who had already assessed the room and found nothing to worry about. He glanced at me as I came in, a brief, dismissive look, the kind one gives to someone they've already accounted for. He did not look worried. The judge was the Honorable Patricia Harding, 26 years on the bench, presiding over family court and civil division. She was known in Charlotte legal circles for her complete intolerance of procedural games and a photographic memory for case documents. Eleanor had told me that Judge Harding read everything, every exhibit, every attachment, every footnote. Good, Eleanor had said. That's exactly what we want. The hearing began with a standard asset review. Marcus Sterling presented Julian's position with the confidence of a man working from a meticulously prepared brief, the transfer documents, the spousal consent, the operational history of Thorn Group, the argument that my claim to the company had been legally extinguished. He was thorough, precise, and extremely skilled. And none of it accounted for what Eleanor submitted at 10:23 a.m. I watched the clerk carry the exhibit binder to the judge's bench. I watched Judge Harding open it to the trust document. I watched her begin to read with the same focused stillness Elias had exhibited in his office, the stillness of someone who understands they are looking at something that changes the shape of things. The silence in that courtroom was unlike any I'd experienced before. Not the silence of anticipation, but the silence of a room collectively realizing that the story it believed it was in was not the story that was actually unfolding. Marcus Sterling's pen stopped moving. Julian was watching the judge. I watched Julian. I watched the moment he understood. It didn't arrive all at once. It came in stages, like the shift of light at the end of a long afternoon, a small change, then another, then the sudden, full awareness of how much the day had progressed without him noticing. His jaw tightened. His shoulders shifted. Something left his posture that had been there when he walked in, some structural certainty that had been holding him upright. Without it, he looked, for the first time in as long as I could remember, genuinely uncertain. Judge Harding looked up. She read one line from the trust document aloud, in the level, unhurried voice of a woman who had been doing this for 26 years and had no interest in theatrics. 49% beneficial interest in Vance Enterprises, now Thorn Group, held for Alara Vance Thorn. Activated upon filing of divorce proceedings by Julian Thorn. Marcus Sterling slowly set his pen down. Julian turned and looked at me. He truly looked. Not the dismissive glance from when I entered. Not the calibrated consideration of a man assessing an opponent. Something else entirely. Something I recognized, with complicated emotions, as the look of a person finally seeing what was in front of them after years of choosing not to look.